Clean and simple stamping for the holidays is a great way to mass-produce cards quickly. But if you still want those cards to be striking, and even to have a bit of shine, use embossing powder in either gold or silver and it will help you create clean and simple cards that really pack a punch. Let me show you the tools and products you're going to need for this technique. First, you're going to need some rubber stamps, and I am using 2 of the stamps from the new Wishing You Joy Stamp TV kit. I have the house stamp, and I have the image that says, "We wish you a Merry Christmas." Then you're going to need a Versamark ink pad. You're going to need some embossing powder, and I'm using the Superfine Detail Gold embossing powder by Ranger. You're going to need an anti-static pad, and that will remove the static from the surface of the card and any oils or debris that are on the surface. And you're going to need some cardstock, and I'm using some of the Gina Designs Pure Luxury Ivory cardstock, and I'm using the heavy base weight. And the reason why I like to use heavy base weight when I'm embossing is because embossing will curl your card a little bit, sometimes warp it, and the heavier the cardstock, the less it warps. So I like to go with the heavy one, and I get a little bit less warping. So to begin, let me show you this stamp here. I use this block that has these grid lines, and I decided that I just want to stamp this whole thing in one easy swoop. So I used the bottom line of the house to line up with this line on the grid. And then for the words, I positioned the S on the end of this greeting and the A on the beginning of this greeting to go halfway, like right in the middle of this line here. And this way I know my image and my greeting will be straight. And when I'm mass producing cards, to be able to stamp it all at once, emboss it, and be done, that's really a great way to do it. So that's my little trick on lining this up perfectly. So I'm going to rub the anti-static pad over the surface of this piece of ivory cardstock. And then I'm going to ink up my image using the Versamark ink. And again, when I have a bigger stamp or a couple of stamps on one block at the same time, I do like to lay the stamp on its back and ink it up this way. This way I can check and make sure I see a nice little shiny film on that whole image. I know it's ready. And it's not going to have any shallow spots. And then I'm going to stamp this right in the center of this piece of cardstock. Make sure that everything gets pressed down. I'm not rocking it, but I'm just pressing hard on all the areas. My next step is to emboss this, and I'm going to use a piece of scratch paper. This way I can easily get my embossing powder back inside the jar. And I'm just going to sprinkle that embossing powder all over my image, and you can see that is a perfectly straight image. Now, if there's any little areas that you see something like a little bit of embossing powder somewhere, you can take a paper piercer or the Tim Holtz craft pick and just gently scrape it away and then blow off any excess, and that will make sure that the image doesn't get ruined by trying to get your finger in there. You can be very precise. Now I'm going to just put this back into the jar and begin embossing. I have my Marvy heat tool, and I'm going to emboss this image. And you'll be able to see right away when that image comes up, it'll turn to a nice shiny look. And you don't want to overcook it because you can burn it, but make sure that it is completely embossed. You'll see it gets shiny and it gets a little bit smooth. You can do several of these at a time. Stamp a few of them, and then emboss a few of them, let those cool, and then do some more. And this way, by the time you're finished embossing all your pieces, you're ready to go back and start assembling the ones that have cooled down. So you can see now that is nice and shiny and ready to be put together on a card. Now I would cut this out using one of the Nestability's rectangle dies, and depending on how much of a border you want, you can use either the large or the small set. But what am I going to do to outline, to do a border around the outside of this piece of cardstock? Well, I want my gold to match perfectly. And although we do have some nice gold cardstock, you might find that your gold embossing powder is a little lighter, a little shinier, maybe a little deeper, a little more distressed. So to get perfect coordination, you can actually create your own edge using the same embossing powder. Let me show you how to do that. Here's a piece of ivory cardstock, and you don't need to use the anti-static pad because it doesn't matter if it gets all over the place as long as it's solid around the perimeter. And what you do is you take your Versamark pad and you just ink up around the perimeter of the card. Okay, so I have that all inked up, and now again working over my scratch piece of paper here, I'm going to sprinkle gold all over the four sides. Okay, now let me get that out of the way. Taking my heat tool, I'm going to emboss that whole perimeter. And that is going to be a perfect match to the focal image of my card that's also embossed. This works out really nicely too if you really want to match a certain color embossing powder, or even sometimes some of your inks won't be a perfect match, your gold ink or your silver ink, and you can really create the perfect coordinated panel by embossing it. See how pretty that is? Plus it's got a lot of texture to it, which you don't necessarily get in cardstock. Cardstock is a lot smoother. This really gives you that almost gritty feel to it that you get with embossing powder. And I just want to make sure that's all heated up. Okay. And then, if I were to layer these pieces together, I would cut that so that it would fit inside, and then just layer it right along the perimeter like that. And you can see that the perimeter and the card and the focal image all coordinate nicely. Let me show you my finished project. Here's my finished card, and what I've done is I've used the same image and I created a border panel using the embossing powder. And then I used a Cuttlebug folder here in the Swiss dot to emboss, to raise emboss a panel as a background. And then once again I took another piece of ivory cardstock and I heat embossed the gold around that perimeter so that everything coordinates beautifully. And even though there are a few layers on this card, there's nothing difficult about it. It has that clean and simple appearance, but it still packs a punch. When edging around the perimeter of a card layer with embossing powder, try using other colors like red, black, or blue to create a non-metallic, perfectly coordinated image and border.